The following contains extremely explicit content and is for mature audiences only. All characters and personalities are used for parody purposes. I did The Walking Dead. Woo! So, real quick, did everybody finish the most recent season?
Yes.
Because otherwise there might be spoilers.
Everybody but Virgil.
Okay. There are some spoilers in here. Nothing too bad. Anyway, here we go. Michonne woke up in her empty bed and stretched. Another night spent by herself, her boyfriend off on some stupid suicide mission or something. Even if he had been here, she probably wouldn't have woken up satisfied, though. It had been far too long since Michonne had had any good nookie, and Mama needed her sugar. Or energy bar, or acorn cookies, or really any type of sustenance, since the pickings were slim these days. She'd even settle for a big old can of pudding at this point, metaphorically speaking. She thought she found the regular screw slut in Rick, the chiseled, somehow usually stubbled, greasy-haired leader of the group. He, however, had proven to not be up to the task. Sure, he'd fuck her, but he always wanted to do it doggy style while shouting out the name Shane, whoever that was. It made it hard for her to get off, even when she was fantasizing the entire time that he was Andrea with a strap on. As Michonne moved to go down the stairs, she heard some noise coming from the other bedroom. It sounded like moaning. Was Carl whacking off again? That boy was constantly doing it. Usually with his baby sister Judith sitting in her crib watching him. It was weird, and normally Michonne didn't mind weird, but there was a line. She thought she'd better rescue Judith before the kid grew up any more scarred than she already would be, because of the zombie apocalypse and everything. Pushing Carl's door open ever so slightly, Michonne was surprised to see that Carl wasn't alone. Enid, the local hussy, was riding Carl's flesh finger, still wearing the flannel shirt that put out the message loud and clear she wasn't interested in sex. That had never stopped any of the guys in Alexandria from fucking her. She was basically the town prostitute and would do it for as little as a balloon or a pair of tattered underwear. Michonne was happy that Carl was finally getting some strange, but hoped he wouldn't get any STDs, since their doctor was dead, and even had she lived, she probably wouldn't have known dick about penises anyway.
Why is this so cool?
Oh, Carl, moaned Enid Dolly, biting her lip and refusing to meet Carl's eyes. Call me Rick, groaned Carl. The sheriff's hat on his head, his hand resting on the gun in his holster. This was too much for Michonne, and she backed out of the room, abandoning baby Judith to whatever horrors her infant brain might remember. Fleeing the house as quickly as she could, Michonne strode through the town of Alexandria, carefully looking down each street and considering her possible partners. Carol was too butch for Michonne, even after her housewife makeover. Daryl was too femme, his long hair making Michonne remember a regrettable college hookup. Aaron and Eric were butt pirates, and while Michonne had no problem with that, it wouldn't do her any good in this case. Tobin was a whiny little bitch who always wanted to cuddle afterwards, so he was out. She was not hooking up with Heath, because God forbid the only two black people in town got together, like seemed to constantly happen to her in the comic books. She remembered when Sasha slobbed Bob's knob and everyone had just assumed that meant she belonged to Tyrese. Her group turned out to all be a bunch of bigot assholes, no matter what they pretended, but she guessed that shouldn't surprise her since they were all from the South. Because, they were in Atlanta at the beginning. Oh, and then there was Father Gabriel, trying and failing to look all badass up on the guard tower. Michonne had forgotten about him. He was black too, but he was even more of a sissy than Daryl and Tobin combined. She did not have the patience to deal with a man who would pray for forgiveness while reaming her asshole, then wash her vagina out with holy water after the deed and try to shove his sperm back into the head of his cock.
Common problem. There's an image.
I don't know I was in for this.
Once was enough, never again. Plus, he was hung with, like Judith. Seriously, there was pretty much nothing there. Michonne saw Eugene standing outside of a window looking in. There was the can of pudding she'd referenced earlier. But one look at the half mullet, half ponytail he sported these days convinced her she was not that desperate. Besides, he was a creeper watching somebody else doing it, hand down his pants in broad daylight. Why people didn't punch him more often was beyond her understanding. Get away, you pansy-ass stalker, Michonne shouted. Eugene looked up at her blankly, drool coming out of his stupid mouth. Huh, he said. I said go beat off in your own house, said Michonne. Oh, I'm not masturbating, said Eugene, dick still in his hand. I'm calculating the precise speed and angle in which one would need to shoot jism in order to... Shut up, said Michonne, interrupting him, disgusted. She pulled out her sword. Scram before I cut off your little pee-pee. Yes, ma'am, said Eugene, waddling off away from her, dick still in his hand. Fucking loser. Michonne approached the window. She wasn't about to start jailing herself in the street, but she was curious as to who Eugene had Eugene all titillated, considering Abraham and Rosita, his favorite voyeuristic targets, and two of Michonne's favorite plays, were out on a supply run. Who had replaced them as the object of Eugene's spank session? Through the steamy window, Michonne could see Glenn fucking Maggie. They were doing it in missionary position, and although the Al Green music drowned out their words, she could tell by the way they were tenderly stroking one another's faces it was all a bunch of sentimental bullshit. Pathetic. Whatever happened to fucking like you meant it? Michonne was not interested in this lousy lovemaking. Michonne had reached the end of the block and hadn't found a single person to fuck. Everyone in Alexandria was worse than the hilt of her sword, which had been her main masturbatory companion since the apocalypse hit, while still in its sheath, of course. Perhaps she should just give up and go home. Then she heard the noises coming from over the wall, and she had an idea. She'd forgotten about the zombies.
What? Absolutely.
For all of those months she had been alone, she'd fucked her lazy, stupid boyfriend and his friend. What were their names? Whatever, I'm too lazy to Google it. Every night. Once she cut off their jaws and arms, they were little threat to her, and the thrusting motion caused by their constant need to try to climb up her while she pushed them back down rocked her world on many an occasion.
Oh my god.
True, they couldn't eat her juicy pussy like she liked, but their cocks were still as hard as life. Harder, even, in their cold, stiff state, and the condoms had kept their meat tools from rotting off inside of her, though eventually there was nothing but nubs left and she'd have to go back to taking care of herself. Could the zombies be her answer now? Father Gabriel tried to ask Michonne where she was going as she opened the gate, but she ignored him because that sissy was never going to challenge her or shoot her in any real way. Out in the open air, she slammed the door behind her in his fucking stupid face and strode away from where he could see her from his vantage point above. It didn't take long for Michonne to find an empty meadow in the nearby woods, and it took even less time for a few hungry walkers to find her. One by one, she hacked off their hands and lower parts of their faces so that they couldn't do her harm. And unless they were female, those she just beheaded, because zombie pussy was stanky. Then, when she had enough around her, 6 total, and no more seemed to be coming, she began to strip off her clothes. Michonne's round chestnut globes glistened in the sunlight, sweat already forming in the Virginia heat. Her snatch, which was untrimmed and in dreads, moistened...
Go on.
Tell me more.
I just came out the car.
dripping her juices onto the dewy grass where the sun had not yet melted it away. Naked in all her warrior glory, she could easily have been mistaken for a savage of old, the type of human that thrived in a world like this in a way she never would have in an old life as a lawyer. She proudly reclaimed her ancestral roots. It took mere seconds for the undead corpses to surround her. Spinning quickly, she began to yank off pants and shirts, leaving them in a state of undress much as she was, though admittedly her body was banging and theirs were falling apart. Maybe she'd underestimated just how decomposed the walkers would be around here, and they were too far gone to offer much pleasure. Before she finished that thought, though, one was on her back. She felt the cold prick of his deceased dong in her ass crack, and bent over to accept it with her gushing pubis. She didn't have any condoms this time, but she'd stashed a pretty good douche in her bedroom for just in case, so she had cleanup options when she got home that night.
There you go.
The walker's penis was everything she'd hoped it would be. Huge and, well, not throbbing because he didn't have any blood pumping, but thick from the vital fluids that had settled down into his extremities when he died. She moaned in ecstasy, grinding against him as his efforts to reach her neck and shoulders drove him further up her cock-hungry canal. Michonne grabbed the two phalli closest to her as the rest of the walkers swarmed in around her. She knew they couldn't appreciate the handjobs, but not only did she love the feel of man meat in her palms, even this kind of man meat, but it also provided her with something to hang on to as she rocked faster and faster into the walker behind her. Sadly, one penis broke off rather quickly, but that's why she waited for 6 of them, and he was soon replaced. Another walker was approaching her tight ass now, and with a bit of deft maneuvering, Michonne managed to get his cock into her lonely anus. It had been a while since she'd had her pooper plugged, and it felt great. A bit of scrambling between the copulating carcasses behind her occasionally let one member or another slip out, but Michonne stuffed them back in quickly enough to keep momentum going, and since they couldn't come, she didn't have to worry about them finishing early and leaving her unsatisfied as Rick so often did. Over and over again, the bodacious body screwed her like Otis screwed Herschel's family by dying because Otis did fucking everything on that farm, and pretty much single-handedly took care of the family until Rick and Shane showed up, and Shane murdered him because Shane was a fucktard who had no respect for his host and didn't care about anyone but himself, which is why he was fucking his best friend's wife and deserved to die as much as that horrible bitch did. But I digress. A couple of hours later, Michonne was finally spent, having boned her way through all half-dozen dicks until they were down to the, well, bone. She managed to reach her sword, left lying in the grass, and killed her paramours, allowing herself to collapse on the cum, sweat, saliva, blood, and gore-soaked grass. How the fucking sounds hadn't attracted more walkers did make a lot of sense to her, but this was a TV show, and sometimes they just did things that didn't make sense, like surviving under a dumpster, or not showing who got their head beaten with a baseball bat before ending a season. It was just the way it was, and even without the realism, this was the most satisfying sex she'd had in years. She'd have to do it again tomorrow if she could find some summer's eve.
That's an advertisement for Summer's Eve then, really.
Some brought to you by Summer's Eve.